predictions in June, and then we updated it just last week with our forecast. And before I tell you where I think it will go, just a little bit of historical perspective, which we're all familiar with, but I think it's worth saying. 2020 holiday was all around the last mile with the surge of digital demand at 50% year over year. Retailers worried about the shipping capacity and making sure the carriers had the capacity to get the product to the doorstep. If 2020 was about the last mile, 2021 was about the first mile, getting the product into the ports through the domestic supply chain, working its way through what is a real strained supply chain to the warehouses and either to the stores or the customer's doorstep. Because of that inventory worry that a lot of consumers had in 2021, people bought earlier in the year. They bought the first 2 weeks. We saw a big pop in November. We also saw very little discounts, the lowest discounts that we've observed, certainly since we've been tracking it officially the last 10 years, but even in my time in retail for the last 30 years. So if 2020 was around the last mile, 2021 was around the first mile, this year is all around profitability. We really think the theme will be how will retailers avoid having margin be the Grinch that steals Christmas. There's so many increased costs, as we're all familiar with, fuel, labor, supply chain, manufacturing, even the packages themselves, the cardboard. And last year, because retailers were able to not have to discount heavily, they were able to absorb those incremental costs, those extra costs. This year, they're going to have absorbed many of those costs. At the same time, going back to the discounting strategies we've seen in the past. So these operational strains will certainly eat into retailers' profitability this year. So that's generally, and then I'll give you a couple of specific data points that I think are most interesting. The last couple of years have had their unique challenges.
Okay.
However, it was within the theme of growth. This year, growth has leveled off. And by the way, I'm talking specifically digital because that's what our index looks like.
Okay.
50% growth in 2020 over the holiday, 5% growth in 2021 for the holiday. We're anticipating a negative 2% digital growth over the holiday for 2022. What I think is interesting, because there's been this narrative that digital has given all of its gains back to the physical brick and mortar sales. And that's not necessarily true. When you look at the compound annual growth rate for the last 3 years, globally we're at 20%. So that's pretty solid in terms of if I'm a retailer, any given year, if I got 20% growth over the holiday, I would be doing high fives. I would be very happy. So I'm not buying into the narrative that digital is dead and it's now gone back 5-10 years. We have set a whole new baseline for digital growth. A couple of other points I'll mention is the earlier shopping is staying around. And what that means is retailers have an opportunity to pull demand earlier in the year, certainly throughout Cyber Week. But what we anticipate, what we forecast is that 29% of holiday sales, and by the way, definitionally, holiday for us is November and December.
Okay.
We predict 29% of all holiday sales digitally will be done in the first 3 weeks of the season. 60% of digital orders will be influenced by the physical store. Whether the demand is generated there because an associate has posted something on social or fielded a email from customer service, or a customer liked something in the store, but they didn't end up buying it there, but a vast majority, according to our research, of consumers will then buy it within a week. Or demand is being fulfilled. You buy it online, but you pick it up in the store. It really puts a lot, and so going back to the margin pressure, while the store will have a significant impact on digital, there's also a big risk that the lack of operational, let me put it another way, the cumbersome and complexity of these omni-channel initiatives will put a strain on margin and operational costs this holiday as well. We actually, according to our research, in 2020, we saw a 40% increase in net new digital shoppers. These are people that would be online, but they wouldn't click the buy button. So they've gone from browsing and research, 40% increase. And by the way, that's across new categories as well. So pure play retailers did really well. But as I mentioned, the store is so critical. This holiday, I mentioned the stat about 60%. We predict and forecast those retailers that have a physical store will grow 1.5 times higher in digital than those that don't. So we're seeing interesting partnerships happening with purely virtual retailers and physical retailers to help those virtual retailers span into the physical world. So it's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, Amazon, what's very fascinating about them is they are leaders, or at least top 2 or 3, in so many different industries and so many different verticals. To call them a retailer now would be a mischaracterization of who they are. Where they obviously had excelled over the last several years in the course of the pandemic is distribution. They are getting closer and closer to the consumer. And in the States, they bought a grocery store, which has become as much of a fulfillment and return center, which you would have never thought of given how Whole Foods had positioned themselves and gone to market. But they are also creating fulfillment centers within miles so that they can not only fulfill efficiently, but do it within hours. And now they're fulfilling overnight as well. Packages are showing up 24 hours a day. So I think, if I take it up one level, putting it in the context of an Amazon question, loyalty over the last couple of years has been defined by health, safety, convenience, and trust. Health, safety, convenience, and trust. If you think about what the commonality is of those 4 things is removing friction from the shopping process. The friction that was removed or wanting to be removed for the last couple of years, I want to buy something at home because it's safe for me to do that, and then I want it fulfilled the way I want it, whether that's delivered to my house or picked it up in the store, around the store, whatever the case might be, click and collect as you mentioned. With that as the baseline, now it's about relevancy, personalization, and service, which will really take loyalty to the next level, which again, the commonality there is enhancing experience. So those retailers, whether you're Amazon or anyone, are competing on a couple of different definitions. One is removing friction. The second one is enhancing the experience. Not only the experience in how the retailer is engaging with that retailer, how the consumer is engaging with that retailer, but the experience of the consumer's life, understanding how busy they are and what problems they're trying to solve. I was talking to somebody about this in New York just last week, is live streaming. So, those that have followed it or used it or tracked it, you would think it's a digital initiative. I'm going to do live streaming as an influencer at home, and I'm going to reach out to my followers and my community and likely influence people's purchasing. Think about this. Store associates are now doing live streaming in the physical store. They're showing the store, they're showing the new end cap and the new display and the new product. They're trying it on so people can get a feel of what it might look like on them. That is physical, the associate being in the store, influencing digital. So there, I think, will be more and more growth there. Also, by the way, not every retailer who has physical is taking advantage of that asset as much as they are. So as you continue to see more adoption there, that will continue to grow. We need to simplify the operations for the associate. The second thing I was asked a similar question. I keynoted at Shop Talk, which is a big conference in Las Vegas, a retail shop. Think about it as Euro Shop or De Mexico, or you get the idea, here in the States. And I talked about, just very in passing, about the changing the role of the store and the associate. And what I said then, and I'll say it here, is the question was, what did they do wrong? And it was actually from a head of operations from one of the largest retailers in the States, because she mentioned her name and her company. And I said, incentives. That's where is a big roadblock. And what I mean by that is, if we're asking our store associates to be fulfillment experts, are we measuring their performance based on pick, pack, and shipping and fulfillment rates? If they're becoming social media managers, are we tracking how many followers they have and how much engagement they have? By the way, the answer likely today is no, we're not tracking that. We're not providing the right incentives and measuring the right performance. So let's face it, I mean, most of the store associates are hourly, and they're motivated based on spiffs, right? In terms of special promotion incentive. And that's not necessarily happening today. We need to rethink, how do we motivate them given their extended role. Their expanded role is, by the way, very welcome from the retailers I talk to, because it gives them more experience and more opportunity. But you gotta, in the short term, motivate them properly.